really super exciting because this is the first time we're doing this in a streaming way. We are here at the brand new central library of Düsseldorf, which just opened last week or something. So this is super new. This is one of the first events we have here. We are really thankful to the city of Düsseldorf for the room. And as you might have noticed, this was all a very short notice announcement for this event. So please bear with us. This is the first time we're doing this style. We're here in a room with like 10 people or something. So this is really a super small on-site crew, mostly 3 fabulous speakers who will do some presentations for us today. This is Mark, by the way. Mark is running the Beyond Tellerrand conference, and many of you might probably know him because I teamed up with Mark for a couple of times with the Accessibility Club events, and we are often doing it like the day before or the day after, so this is what we're doing this time again. But this time, I have the great honor to have Mark with me here because he's the one with all that streaming gear. Without him, we couldn't do it like this. So this is awesome. Mark, do you want to say something to the Accessibility Club folks?
Just a quick hello. Happy to finally do an event with Yoshi again, because we did some, but that is like 8 years ago. Oh, damn, we did get old. And I'm really happy to co-host this year, to be supportive with the tech, but you know, main work and main brain is him and yeah, Yoshi. Anything else?
Well, to be honest, it wasn't that much of an effort doing this because it's mostly that you have the gear and we have the room, and so it was really a simple thing. We are really excited. I hope that this works. I hope that we have a stable live stream. I hope that we have captions. I actually didn't check if they are there. I will have to do that when Hide is talking. Just before we kick off, some housekeeping things. First of all, obviously we have a code of conduct. I just can't show you the link at the moment, but you can please find it on our website. It's like ali.club/code-of-conduct or something. You're gonna find it there. Basically, it says that we're like kind to each other. We don't harm each other. We don't do any crazy things. Oh, someone could, Karl, could you please mute my laptop because it's doing some stuff there. There is a key. Yeah, this was it. Thank you. Great. So fantastic. We are going to have 3 presentations, and I planned them to always start at 1:15. So there will be the first presentation by Hide. It's going to start at 12:15 in a couple of minutes probably, and Hide will have up to 45 minutes to tell you something. He told me that the talk usually takes around that time, but we can do Q&A if you want afterwards. We will try to keep an eye on the live stream, on the comment section. So if you're watching us on YouTube, you can enter some comments. I will try to ask Hide, or someone will try to ask Hide afterwards. We also have a Zoom call running, and you can also dial into that Zoom call. You can't do much there until we're going to have a discussion a little bit later on, so we will try to get you into the Zoom call later. The second presentation will be Molly Watt. I don't know if you have attended or attended the Beyond Tellerrand conference the last 2 days or watched the live stream. Both Hide and Molly talked at the Beyond Tellerrand, so I'm really happy to have you here again. This is a great honor. And there's also Karl Groves. He gave kind of a lunch break session at the Beyond Tellerrand and did a workshop on Sunday. So it's great to have him back because he's kind of a regular attendee and supporter of the Accessibility Club. And by the way, supporter, Karl and his company Tenon, they actually sponsored the live captions. So thanks a lot to that. I hope it's really going to work out. It was a little bit difficult to organize that, but great. Molly will give her presentation at 1:15, again, like 45 minutes. We will always have like 15 minutes of break. It's possible that we pause the live stream for that. Don't know yet. And then there will be a third presentation by Karl, and it's going to start at 2:15. Again, 45 minutes or something. It's going to be about the topic of overlays, which is kind of interesting even in Europe in the meantime. So I'm really excited about that one. And when Karl is finished, we've got like another half an hour something left, maybe a short break and stuff. So we can use that for some sort of discussion. I actually don't have any idea what we're going to talk about. But if there is something you would like to talk about, you can already have ideas and throw them into the ring. So basically, that's it for the housekeeping. I hope I didn't forget anything. It should be around 1:15 now, I guess. So yeah, give us like 2 or 3 minutes. You on the live stream. Nice to have you here. Hope you're enjoying it. We will prepare Hide for his presentation, and yeah, let's kick this off. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Hello, welcome back. This is could browsers fix more accessibility problems automatically? It is a talk I'm excited about because I think it's interesting to look at, can we do things automatically? For those of you who have attended Beyond Teleland yesterday, you've probably also seen Molly talk. She showed us how important it is to look at the user perspective of all of this. I think that is the most important perspective when you look at accessibility. That's important to say at the start of this. Yes, we can try and do some things automatically, but ultimately it matters what the experience is for end users, and that's what we want to try and do. But I feel like browsers could do their part here. And that's what I'll be talking about to you today. So my name is Hidde. I am a freelance accessibility and front-end consultant. I work for lots of different organizations, most recently for the World Wide Web Consortium. I have a blog as well that you can like and subscribe. It's got RSS, so you can add that to your RSS reader if you use that sort of thing. Yeah, if we're talking about web accessibility, often there's a lot of different ways that we try and reach people and try to make the web more accessible. So some organizations have websites where they go at length and explain how to make the web more accessible. And W3C is an example of that. It's got a lot of information for people who are building websites, people who are designing websites, also folks who are working in more like planning and content. There's a lot of information there. There is the Mozilla Developer Network, MDN, which has lots of information about accessibility. There's the Accessibility Club. So there's lots of different websites where you can find information about accessibility. There's lots of accessibility specialists who go and talk about accessibility at conferences, at workshops, those sorts of things. So there's a lot of outreach that is happening, and that's awesome, but it does not reach everyone. There's always going to be websites that aren't accessible or that have kind of missed this guidance, that didn't know what they need to be doing for some reason or another. It could just be websites that aren't built professionally, just like websites that are built for hobbies and stuff like that. So it's never going to reach every single website owner. And if it does reach them, maybe it's a website that doesn't have a team dedicated to it, or cannot fix current bugs. So there's always going to be accessibility bugs and barriers in websites, however well we do at kind of educating folks and giving workshops. So accessibility outreach is great, but it's not enough. And I think we can detect some of the problems automatically. I think that's a really interesting thing to look at. Now, one interesting project in that regard is called ACT Rules. It is a task force of the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group at the W3C. That's the group that works on the WCAG guidelines, among others, which is the internationally recognized standard for web accessibility. And what ACT Rules try to do is take this WCAG standard and turn it into testable rules. So rules that you can test automatically. And that's important because there are a lot of different vendors of automated testing software. You may use a company, there's a lot of different engines for kind of testing web accessibility, and what this group tries to do is harmonize those rules. So trying to get to one set of rules that we can all agree on that are good rules to test with. Now, interpretation of WCAG is notoriously hard, and that's not because WCAG is bad. It's because it's trying to balance between rules that are very easy to test and also rules that are kind of helpful. And to be helpful, they might need to be quite broad, because otherwise you would need a lot of rules. So there is a big balancing act going on kind of for the people who are writing WCAG and coming up with new success criteria. We don't want too many success criteria. We also don't want success criteria that are too broad and that are hard to interpret. There's a great article about this problem called the Accessibility Interpretation Problem by Glenda Sims and Wilco Fears of DQ. They write about how sometimes if you have a website tested for accessibility and you give it to 5 different consultants, they might give you completely different results. So one company might fail you for one problem and another might just ignore that problem and fail you for completely different problems. And that's difficult. We need this standard to be applied in the same way somehow. But as I mentioned, that's hard because many of these criteria are difficult to interpret, and there are reasons for that. So interpretation can be quite difficult. So some problems are automatically detectable. That's why we can make rules like the ACT rules. And that made me think maybe we can also automatically fix some of these problems. If we can see that there are problems, maybe we can also come up with fixes for them. And of course, it's important to note that it's only a small subset of issues that we can automatically detect. And that means there's also an even smaller subset of issues that we can automatically fix. So if you look at WCAG AA criteria, there's 50 criteria there. And it depends on who you ask how many of those you could automatically test for. It goes kind of between 10 and I've heard 40% of issues, and that means the majority of issues isn't automatically testable. It needs human beings to figure out if there is a problem. And that has to do with, we want to optimize websites and web apps for users, and there's a lot of human aspect in this. Like, we need to look at what's the intent of the author, we need to look at what the experiences of the user, and a lot of that you can't automate like that. But there are some issues that you can automate, and that's the issues I want to focus on today. One bit of warning, it doesn't relieve websites from their responsibility. In many places, including Europe and the US, there's legislation in place that says you've got to make your website accessible. Often that means you've got to meet WCAG. So the 50 criteria that are there, you've got to get green check marks for each of them. This still applies, of course. But I'm looking at ways to see if can we potentially still make websites better from browsers, because even though I don't want to relieve websites from their responsibility, I do want users to experience the web in a way that works better for them. And I think often websites can be improved by browsers. It would put the user back into user agent if they try and make improvements. So I see this as kind of two parallel paths. On the one hand, organizations need to get their accessibility right. But on the other hand, browsers also can fix things when they are able to. I think those things can exist at the same time, and they should. Now, this might remind you of accessibility overlays, and Karl will be talking about those a bit more later as well. It's well known they have issues. So accessibility overlays are bits of software that you can install on your website as a plugin, which means you load a bit of JavaScript, and then this overlay, at least that's what it promises, it will completely make your website accessible. So it will take your inaccessible website and it's going to turn it into a perfect accessible website. This is what they promise, and it doesn't take a lot of accessibility expertise to realize that might not be possible to do at all. So some vendors make false claims. Karl will be talking about those at length. But it often happens that they'll say, you can meet WCAG if you just include our 2 lines of JavaScript. Be careful when you see that, or when your clients are impressed by that statement, because that is not something that is physically possible. Sometimes overlays also don't work well, or they make things worse for people with disabilities. So they'll inject some JavaScript that is meant to make things better, but it actually makes things a little bit worse. And that's kind of orthogonal to what we're trying to do. Sometimes they only fix the websites that they are on. Is another thing to realize. So there might be a couple of websites that have paid this vendor to install the overlay plugin, but then there are many more websites that don't have the plugin. So it doesn't fix the web at large. It just fixes particular websites of people who were able to give money to this overlay vendor. And I think, as a web community, we shouldn't want that. We should try and fix the web as a whole rather than just individual websites. Another thing to note is that overlays often don't work well when you're using like an SPA, because sometimes your DOM will get updated, and overlays are not always watching your DOM. They might not realize that part of the website has been replaced, and then they might give an experience that relies on kind of the old state, didn't realize the state has completely updated, and they might be fixing a previous version of your page or a previous iteration. So that often doesn't work well. Now, these facts and many more are on a website called overlayfactsheet.com. which many accessibility specialists around the world have signed. I have two, and you can find a lot more information about accessibility overlays there, and also send your clients there when they are considering installing an overlay, so that they can get the right information about this. Just to get back to that user perspective, there are many comments as well from people with disabilities who have commented on how it is for them to use websites with overlays. For instance, Connor Scott Gardner, a blind student, commented that it was easier to navigate a website without the overlay than it was with the overlay turned on. So they found that when they turned off that overlay, it was actually easier for them to use the website. So overlays don't make things better most of the time. So that's one thing to say about overlays, but even when we realize there are these caveats, I think we could still try and have browsers fix more accessibility problems automatically. Yeah, today I want to look at some ways that browsers could do that. I've put them kind of into categories that I imagine are checkboxes in a browser. This is a bit of a simplification. Originally, I did this presentation for a bunch of browser vendors as part of the Web We Want initiative. And they were looking for ideas from web developers on kind of how to improve the web, how to improve browsers or the platform. And they allow people to kind of talk about this. And I've oversimplified this by saying, let's introduce a bunch of checkboxes. I think individual browser engineers and designers will be able to come up with better patterns to include these things. Maybe sometimes they're features that are always turned on. Sometimes there might be things that are checkboxes or something. For now, I've imagined them as checkboxes. Now, some of these already exist. Some of these are looking at the future. And many of these exist only in some of the browsers. So yeah, bear that in mind. Now, the first one I want to talk about is a checkbox called Force Readability. What if a browser would have that available for users? It would be really important because according to Oliver Reichenstein, he famously said web design is 95% typography. Typography is super important on the web, and yet we have a web currently that has lots of typography problems. Websites are often quite hard to read, and that's because people insert lots of ads, people have overlays that annoy you, they might have cookie warnings or kind of paywall structures. So many times websites are quite hard to read, and I think that's something we could automatically fix. So what if you had a web page that was terrible to read, like with gray text on a gray background, with like a really tiny and thin font? What if you could turn on a checkbox that would turn it into something that is super legible? I think that would be a feature that people would really like. And as you probably know, this already exists. It is in Firefox in reading mode. There is something in Edge. There's something in iOS browsers like Safari. And these often have functionality like they can make the text more readable, but they also come with things like read aloud mode, so you can actually have an article read out to you, like a screen reader, but not using specialized software, but just in your browser. Edge even has like grammar tools, and you can set lots of preferences, like I prefer this font to that font, or I like dark mode to light mode. And this is good for people with lots of different disabilities, and it is also good for users at large. Like a lot of different users will benefit from something like this. Now, something else that is a problem I find in a lot of websites is that they don't allow zoom. It's a little bit of an old problem because some browsers have fixed this, but it has to do with a meta tag that you can add into your website, and it lets you set the viewport to user scalable no. And what that does is it would stop the browser, or the browser would stop the user from doing a pinch zoom on your web page. And that basically means they won't be able to zoom in if they're not able to read what's on the page. That's annoying for usability, for accessibility too. So basically, this checkbox would just ignore the thing. It's something that various browsers have now implemented, including iOS. They announced in, I think it was 2017, they are now going to ignore this tag because they realize it's better for users to be able to zoom in than to give developers that control that they can disable it. There are some valid use cases, I think, for developers to have this functionality or have this option. I was working on like cropping thing where you can upload a photo and then crop it. If you want to do that on the touchscreen, it's actually helpful to disable the browser zoom so that you could zoom the photo. These are very specialized use cases, and it might be useful to be able to overwrite, but I think the needs of users are much more important here, and there are many more users who just need to zoom in. Now, what about contrast? It's one of the accessibility problems you see on almost every single website out there, and it's actually something we can very easily automatically detect. So you can just find that two colors don't meet some algorithm. Now, these algorithms aren't perfect, but they do give a really good indication of this is not going to be readable by a lot of people. So let's say you have a website that has a bit of photo and then some text on top of that. If it's a light photo and it's got light text on it, that's very hard to read for many people. So if there was a checkbox that says enforce contrast, what it could do is just draw some backplate behind the text. This is something that is common, as I mentioned before. I forgot to say that. So 86.4% of homepages, according to WebAIM, has contrast problems, just to underline what I was saying earlier. That's a huge amount. That's almost every website, like I said before. So it's really something that I think we should try and fix automatically. And I think a way that we could do that, as I mentioned, is draw a backplate behind the text. So if you have white text that's hard to read, if you put a black backplate underneath that, you get more contrast. Now, there are actually browser makers who have looked at this. One is the Polypane browser, which is a developer-friendly browser that kind of exists for developers to make websites. But it has, they've also worked on a plugin called Fix Contrast. You can run that in your browser, and then when you go to any website that has low contrast, it will update the contrast for you so that every text you see will have a contrast that meets a certain threshold. So you can say, I want all my contrast to meet at least WCAG AA or something like that. You can set a minimum contrast, and it will just update that for you on any website that you go to. I think that's great because this puts the power back to the user. It makes user agents about users and not about the needs of kind of web designers or web developers. Basically, they've screwed up because 90% of websites have low contrast, and I think to give users the power to have contrast that works for them is much more important. So I think that's a really good thing to have. It can mess up people's web designs, but I think that's kind of the point. If their design had contrast that was too low, then it makes sense to try and fix that automatically. Microsoft Edge is also working on something similar. They have introduced this in Windows high contrast mode, so when you've turned that on, they'll also automatically draw backplates behind text that is hard to read. And it responds to certain CSS properties. You can read more about that on the Microsoft Edge dev blog. I'll be sharing these resources later, so you can find the link later. But it's a great blog post that explains how forced color modes work and some of the things that Edge will do to make things better. And that's actually something that's also in the CSS specification now, in the color adjustment module. So the backplate principle is actually explained there too. So they are recommending browsers. It is currently, I think, a working draft still, but when it becomes a recommendation, they are recommending browsers to implement this and make sure that there is enough contrast, especially in high contrast mode. Another common accessibility problem is focus indication. You'd be surprised how many websites turn that off. And again, this is something that lots of users need, and if it doesn't exist, the browser could quite easily insert it because they provide the controls to remove it. They can also provide the setting to completely force it. So focus indication is important for people to see where they are on the page. So if there are a couple of links on your page, you want to see which one you're on. And if you're using a mouse, you know which one you're on because the mouse cursor is kind of hovering above that link. But if you use anything else than a mouse, and that could be a keyboard, that could be a kind of more specialized piece of assistive technology, you need to know which element you're currently focused on. There needs to be a way for that to be visible, so that you can see if you're on this link or that link, make that distinction. Now that's something I think browsers could quite easily do. Developers can turn off focus indication by setting the outline property to none. Browsers have a user agent style sheet where they can force certain things. It's something that I've recently found out Google Chrome offers. They have a setting in their accessibility settings that's called show a quick highlight on the focused object. It is the closest to what I was suggesting. It will highlight what the current element is and then make it clear. It will disappear after a few seconds, so that's a bit weird, but it works for at least some of the use cases. And I think it would be really helpful for all browsers to have something that just overrides the website's preference for focus indication and does something that works better for the user. Often web designers will say, this looks ugly, I don't want this in my beautiful design that I've imagined. But yeah, if end users just need to see where they are, I think that's a priority we need to put a lot higher. Now, what about autoplay? Again, I think that's something that often websites do, and for some users that really gets in the way. Audio, video, and GIFs, they can disturb users, and sometimes they can even cause seizures. So, for many of these users, it would be very helpful to not have anything autoplay. Now, we could rely on individual web developers and designers to not use this autoplay stuff, but I think browsers could also detect whenever something is about to autoplay and then suppress that. And I think, again, if that's under a setting or there's a checkbox for that to be turned on, I think that could be very helpful for these users. Something else that I think would be helpful is to allow users to navigate by landmark. And landmarks are a concept from ARIA in websites, and it basically allows web developers to set which areas their website has. So they can say, here's my navigation, here's my footer, here's my sidebar, and then it allows users to go directly to those places on the website. At least that's the theory. They can make it easier to efficiently jump to parts of the page. But they can only be navigated currently with using certain assistive technologies. Like many screen readers will have something built in to jump directly to landmarks. I think browsers could actually expose this to all users. And I think that would serve two purposes. One, that landmarks would be better defined because everyone would see them. They would not just be a layer that's kind of only shown to certain users, but it's available to everyone. It would probably improve the quality as well because it's easier to see when something is off. So here's an example. This is the Guardian website. What they could do is display a sidebar, which I've drawn on the left. So I've added a gray background and put a bunch of links there. I've done a navigation section, which has main, subjects, and subboards. And then I've done a sections section, which has main article, most viewed, related articles. Basically, all the different things that you see when you look at a Guardian news article. I've actually had to make this up because the Guardian webpage that I've taken a screenshot of didn't have these landmarks. They had different names, and some of them didn't exist as a landmark. So it would require some work from a website like the Guardian to actually expose useful landmarks. But if they did, then I think that could be really helpful to many different users to be able to directly go to the thing that they were looking for, especially as web pages get more complex and they have so many different sections on one web page. Because this is a news article about Greta Thunberg, but it actually has many more different things also listed, like related articles and most popular and all these sorts of things. So yeah, having some kind of navigation would be pretty helpful, I think. Kind of related to that, many websites implement skip links, which are links at the top of your page that allow you to jump directly to important sections like the main content. And I think that could be something that browsers could add automatically so that it doesn't rely on individual web developers to add that. So web developers, they currently implement their own links to skip to the main content. And if browsers just kind of put that in automatically when they found a main element, the main content, that would save web developers work, but it would also take away kind of the reliance on web developers to implement this, because if they would miss that, this browser functionality would still provide the functionality. So on the Guardian website, again, that could look something like this with the bar at the top that says skip to and then has all the names of different things that are in the web page, like the navigation or like the main content. And this way, we don't rely on individual developers to do it. And it would also make things a bit more consistent, because skip links always look different on different web pages. And yeah, it might be helpful to have that look the same as well for users. Then moving to sticky content, they can be quite a nice UI functionality, but they can also get in the way for a lot of different users. So I feel like that could be another thing the browsers could help with. Sticky elements, they sometimes cover too much of the screen, especially when people are zoomed in quite a bit, and that's a very common use case, for instance, for users with low vision. So browsers could just stop the sticking. There could be a setting for users to say, I never want content to stick, and browsers could then honor that. It would be basically ignoring one CSS property if it is done with CSS, and I think that could be a really quick fix for a lot of websites. Of course, again, we would be ignoring the intentions of the web designers. It might annoy them, but if it's behind some kind of setting, I think that could be quite helpful. Now, what about overlap in content? It's something that I find a lot, again, in accessibility audits, that when users zoom in, again, that's a very common use case, that certain parts of the website will overlap. So there will be a bit of text here and a bit of text there, and then the text becomes kind of unreadable. Now, browsers could act when it happens, and then prioritize readability again. They could put the elements kind of linearly, so rather than being next to each other, they would be, the one thing would flow underneath the other thing. It's basically what happens in a reader mode as well. And again, they would prioritize readability over UI perfection. I think that could be helpful too. Something else, it's a bit of a pet peeve, is truncated text. It is a common thing that people like to do, and it sometimes gets used as a content design strategy. So, to make the website look pretty and have like the same amount of lines somewhere, they will use truncation. So let's say here I have some Linda McCartney vegetarian quad, and then there's 3 dots. And this looks very pretty if you have a bunch of products. But I don't know now what these things are, because there's just a couple of dots and I have no way to find out what they are. So in this case, a web designer is prioritizing it. We want it to look pretty over what I as a user want to see, which is, which product do you want me to buy here? What's the buy button going to do here? Am I going to get this type of burger or another? I want to know what that content is more than I want to see something that's pretty. So browsers could basically ignore text overflow ellipses if users choose that. And what that would do is, if you have something that says vegetarian quad, it would just put that on the next line and it would say quarter pounder burgers. And it even has 227 grams. So, this gives me information that I would otherwise not have, or I would need to click through to the product. And I think it would be really helpful to give users the ability to kind of choose, I want to always see the content versus I want something that looks pretty. According to the designer, I don't think this looks terrible either. So in many cases, that's a balancing act, and we can balance it in a way that users can read the content they want to read. So yeah, lots of different examples of where I think browsers could step in and allow users to have more choice about what they prefer to make a web interface work better for them. It is not a get out of jail free card. I think it's still important that people who make websites do user research and test with users to really make sure that the thing they're building does the thing that they are hoping, and that it just has a pleasant experience for everyone. But as we know, not every website does that. So I think if browsers can step in, that would be really, really helpful. And that leaves me with another question. Like, there might be other things. The things I've mentioned are things we could probably do today because they rely on some CSS property or they're kind of relatively easy to do. There could be things where we could have browsers guess a bit more. And I'm a little wary because if they guess wrong, that might be quite bad for the end result. But one instance of that is, for instance, Safari will guess accessible names. So when you have a form field which has a bit of text in front of it, which isn't connected to it in the HTML, you will still get an accessible name for that because it will assume that the text that's near the input is the name for the text, for the input. So Safari is doing some guesswork there. Something else that a browser could maybe guess is if you have paragraphs that are just one line, maybe they are headings, maybe they're not, but this is something maybe browsers could also guess because for end users it's helpful to have these things in there as headings. Something else I've thought about is what if everything that has a button role gets to be a button in its full form in browsers. So currently, when you add a row of button to like a div element in your website, it's not going to get the button behavior. It's just going to get the button semantics. I think it could be useful if browsers would also add the behavior. So allow these buttons to work as submit buttons, make them activatable by keyboard, that sort of thing, just based on that there is a row of button, assuming that whenever that happens, it needs to be a button in its full form. And I know that some people disagree with this because they say sometimes something would have a row of button but would not be keyboard accessible or focusable. But yeah, I feel like it could be something that would be used as a hint. What about if you have a bunch of words that start with a bullet or a number? If that gets repeated, maybe that's a list. I think that could be, again, something that browsers could draw their conclusions about and say maybe that's something that we can do automatically. So yeah, with some caveats in mind, could browsers then fix more accessibility problems automatically? I obviously think they can. I think it would be helpful if browsers would step in and sometimes fix things on behalf of the user. But I would love to hear your input about this later too, because yeah, I'm probably overseeing lots of things. So yeah, it would be helpful to think about that. To that extent, I have started a community group at the W3C called AliFeet, or Accessibility Features Community Group, where a bunch of us are thinking about what are some features we could recommend to browsers that make sense. Also, what are features maybe that are already in browsers, kind of trying to catalog these. And hopefully then convince browsers to either prototype them in the browser code or actually ship with them. Now, when I first did this talk a couple of years ago, after that, many of these things actually started appearing in browsers, so I was probably not the only one thinking about this stuff. But there are still quite a few things that aren't in browsers that they could implement and that could really help make the web more accessible as a parallel path to every individual website owner needs to do their job of making websites accessible. So yeah, Accessibility Feet, it's a community group. It's currently kind of paused because some of us don't currently have the time and bandwidth for it. But we are looking for kind of new volunteers and looking at restarting it in the next year. We've started with a catalog of accessibility features, and we're really looking to get input from a lot of different people to make sure that we're recommending the features that make most sense and that are actually helpful. And with that, thanks very much for listening. I hope we can have a bit of Q&A here today. And yeah, curious to take your questions. Thanks. Oh, Karl has a question. Yeah.
Um, this is just going to the stream. Okay. So what is the, you talked about the features community group. Is there any overlap there with any of the work done on personalization or any of that sort of stuff? Is there any coordination between those two groups?
There is currently no coordination between, but I can see there is a lot of overlap there, for sure, yeah. So I'll write it on my list to make sure that we do have that coordination regularly, because that makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Any more questions? I also asked a question on the live stream if someone wants to ask something. So please enter your questions to the chat box on YouTube. Maybe I should keep an eye on the Zoom call. By the way, we're apologizing. The captions don't work yet because there are some technical issues. We're troubleshooting. Actually, we set up fine, I think, but we're still trying to get that work. So. Any more questions in the room? Okay. Then I think we probably have a short break after this. Thank you, Hide. That was really interesting. We can forward questions to you if there are questions on the live stream as well. So we're going to meet again in like 15 minutes or something at 1:15 then. 25 minutes, actually. Oh, you were really fast here.
Yeah.
Okay.
35.
So no worries. We're going to have a 25 minutes of break, and we're going to meet back again at 1:15 with Molly. Looking forward to that. Okay. So I just got the notice that the captions are working now. Finally.
We should talk a little bit more just to.
Okay. Okay. So see you again in 25 minutes, right? Okay, great. So we're going to start into the second session. Where is Molly? There is Molly. I just realized that I forgot to introduce Hide, who was speaking before. So just a couple of words on both Hide and Molly, because the fun thing is that they already have been guests to the Accessibility Club, like 3 years ago in Berlin, which was our first big conference, and they were both speaking at the conference. Molly was opening the conference, actually, which is really nice, and Hide was speaking a little bit later. So for both of you, it's a welcome back to the Accessibility Club, actually. And this time, the great thing was that you were both speaking at Mark's Beyond Tellerrand conference yesterday and the day before. So I'm a little bit proud of this fact, because it's kind of a cooperation between Mark and me and the Beyond Tellerrand and the Accessibility Club. And I'm always really happy to, like, if we have speakers who are in the Accessibility Club first, because it was for quite a long time, it was the other way around, that I just grabbed the speakers from Beyond Tellerrand. So I'm really proud of that a bit. Yeah, Hide already introduced himself. What I wanted to say is that he gave a brilliant talk about semantics yesterday at Beyond Tellerrand, which is really great, because I think this is something very essential every web developer should learn. And I just asked Mark, the talk of Hide will be published as a recording soonish. So I can very much recommend you having a look at that talk. If possible, I'm going to link this in the YouTube comments for the stream later on, as soon as the video is published. So that's great. And Molly gave a very, very brilliant talk yesterday as well. It was the closing one. And she's got a very special story. And she's a very special person. I really like her, and I like her energy, and she's doing a great thing. I don't want to talk too much about her, because I think she's doing it herself. So very much looking forward to Molly Watt and what she's going to talk to us today. So Molly, it's yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to find my station. I'm going to stay here so I don't trip over anything. Okay, so thanks so much for that lovely introduction, Joshi, and it is my pleasure to be at Beyond Tellerrand and here as well. I'm always up for, coming out to events and travelling as much as I can, now that it can happen again. So really, really happy to be here. Just a pre-warning, if you did see me speak at Beyond Tellerrand, I apologise, some of this might sound a bit repetitive, but hopefully you'll still find some interest in what I have to say as well. So, I'm on Twitter at Molly Watt Talks, so if you did have any questions or something you think about later, please do feel free to reach out and ask anything. Just want to quickly ask, can everybody hear me okay in the room? Yes? Great. And I am assuming everybody online can hear me okay. Hopefully that's happening. Yes? Yeah? Cool, great. So I'm going to proceed. So, a little bit about myself. I am... it's all coming out later. Sorry, didn't realise I did that. So I am an accessibility and UX consultant. I have my own company called Molly Watt Talks, which was founded about 4 or 5 years ago now with the help of my parents, mainly through my own life experience and realising and noticing a gap in the industry, in the tech world, where it really felt that it needed some extra expertise from people like myself. So with that, I've done lots of keynote speeches, so traveling around and talking about my story and why accessibility and tech and digital is so, so important. But not just for people like myself, but many, many others. I have also written 2 children's books, which I don't often talk about, but I donated those to the charity that my family founded as well, called the Molly Watt Trust. Another one with my name in it. I did not choose that, but there we go. The Molly Watt Trust just quickly fundraises for people with Usher Syndrome, which is the condition I have, which I'll brush over a little bit in a moment. But I wrote and illustrated 2 children's books, which is all about it's okay to be different, basically, just acknowledging our differences and getting on with it. And it's about 3 cute frogs, of all characters, frogs. But yes, and I also blog and I do videos. I'm not one of those super famous vloggers as of yet, but who knows. But yes, I also have a part-time role at a web design agency called Nexa Digital. They are part of Nexa Group, which I don't know if anyone's heard of. It's a Swedish company, but we're all around the human end experience, end user experience, and accessibility plays a big part in that. So there I would run lots of accessibility audits and workshops in inclusive design. Cool. Now, this is a quote that I bring up in every single talk I do because it resonates with me so, so much, and it's no one understands inclusion like those who have been excluded, which leads me on nicely into my story. So again, apologies for you guys listening to me again already about my story. But I was born deaf, so I was given my first pair of hearing aids at 18 months old. So that was my first introduction to technology, right? At 18 months old, because I couldn't hear a thing. My parents noticed that I wasn't responding to them when they were calling out my name, and I would only watch like cartoons that had no sounds in, like Tom and Jerry. Don't know if people have watched that, but that was all I was fixated on, just pictures, moving illustrations and stuff. So it was my mum who said, I think there's something not quite right here, spoke to our doctor who pointed us in the right direction, and I was diagnosed with a severe hearing loss at 18 months. And shortly after that, given my first pair of analog hearing aids and then intensive speech therapy, and that is how I am able to communicate the way I do today. Had a really happy childhood. I was always kind of the deaf kid. I was the only deaf one in the classroom. I was the only deaf one in the friendship groups and in my family. But I was used to that. I had big old colourful hearing aids. I quite liked how colourful they were for some strange reason. But that, I guess, just showed how bubbly I was and how much of a happy child I was. It really didn't faze me being the only deaf child. I had 2 older brothers and a younger sister. We went on lots of holidays, took part in lots of children's activities, did a lot for the Deaf Children's Society, which is a massive charity in the UK, which took us on some really cool adventures through the years. Now, that was all well and good. However, I got to the end of primary school and I was struggling to lip read, and I was struggling to read the board in the classroom. So this sort of format where we're sat in this room, where there would be a board with writing, and I'd be sat at the desk. And I was about 11 years old, and I noticed I wasn't able to read the board. I noticed I was struggling to lip read, and that was what made me feel really excluded again. I was suddenly realising I didn't feel as included as I did before with my hearing aid, because I was really struggling. I experienced lots of headaches, and it was actually my teacher of the deaf at the time who said, Molly, you might need reading glasses. It's not unusual for deaf children and adults to feel such exhaustion through the eyes because it's so visual. You're constantly looking at lips and visual clues, gestures, facial expression. It is tiring. So we went for a routine eye check, just a normal optician in the UK called Vision Express. And this optician, I was really lucky, to be honest, this very rarely happens, but had been reading up on a condition called Usher Syndrome. And he has said to my parents, do you know why Molly is deaf? And they said, no, we were told it was a technical blip. It happens from time to time. And that was that. And he said, well, looking at the back of Molly's eyes, I think there's something not quite right, and I think it's linked to her hearing loss. So that was when I, in fact, received the diagnosis of Usher syndrome. Now, Usher syndrome is actually quite common, but it's one of those typical invisible disabilities. A lot of people with Usher don't particularly feel outwardly accepted because we come across the way we do, and a lot of people assume our needs, or they assume we're okay when we're not. So actually, a lot of people, when they're diagnosed with Usher syndrome, it's almost like they're still in the closet for a really long time before they start stumbling around and realising they actually really need help. But Usher syndrome is the most common cause of congenital deaf blindness. So what that means is actually a genetic condition that I was born with. No one else in the family has it. Both my parents had the same recessive gene, and then it was then a 1 in 4 chance of one of their children having Usher. And that just so happened to be me. So Usher syndrome is deafness. So it's you're born deaf, and then the acquired blindness kicks in, called retinitis pigmentosa. RP on its own is also incredibly common. It's very common. You lose your peripheral vision, and night blindness, glare blindness as well thrown in there. So that is my condition. I have Usher syndrome. So that's that for now. Helen Keller, I also talked about her yesterday because I think it's just important to kind of remind ourselves how far we have come, particularly in the technology world, because as I mentioned a moment ago, my first introduction to tech was at 18 months old. Had I not have had that, I would be struggling to communicate now. There's deaf people and children that aren't diagnosed with a hearing loss till later on, and then they might be implanted and given hearing aids later on, and they may have access to speech, but their speech is often delayed. So it can really cause a sense of exclusion in social groups and things. This is a really great quote from Helen Keller from her book, "Blindness separates people from things, and deafness separates people from people." And that's why I bang on about communication and why I'm so passionate about that sense of inclusion. And I don't feel I would have had that had I not have had these hearing aids so early on to now. One of the things as well in this picture, Helen Keller is using her hands to feel, this lady has a name which is on the tip of my tongue, but she was basically with her all the time. And she's feeling her top lip, bottom lip, and her voice box. And that was how she would understand what she was saying. If you can imagine, in COVID times, I don't think anyone would appreciate someone's hand in someone's face. And also, following on from that, the communication has been really, really hard the last couple of years with the masks and trying to stay safe. It has been really quite isolating for people like myself who relied on this for ways of access. But had I not have had the hearing aids at all, this would have been my method of communication. Helen Keller was born in the 18th century, so here we are in 2021. It's not that long in retrospect, but you know, this is how far we have come, which is amazing. So my life has revolved around accessibility. So I talk about tech and how passionate I am because of everything it's enabled me to do nowadays. So the first one was, okay, how's Molly going to access communication in order to feel included in the classroom, to ask for help when she needs it, to apply for a job, to do her exams, to get into university, to get all of that. And that all stemmed from the hearing aid technology because that was what existed and we had access to. So to put into perspective how far the tech revolution, the hearing aid evolution has come, I always like to bring us back to reality by talking about how far we've come in my 27 years. So when I was born at 18 months old, analog hearing aids, that was what was available on the NHS, and that was what I was given. I absolutely hated them, according to my parents, because of course, what 18-month-old wants funny things in their ears? You know, I was take them out, hide them anywhere and everywhere, and they would not be in my ears for a long, long time. And I think actually looking back in hindsight, it was probably due to the lack of quality of sounds, and it was all or nothing, which would have been a bit overwhelming for a deaf child. Following on from that, when I got to the age of 9 and I was introduced to my first digital pair of hearing aids, this was the day I first heard birds singing, leaves crunching in parks, and I really realised the value of better quality hearing. And I was only 9 years old, so that was amazing. And this is when I really realised I needed to get up and wear my hearing aids every day because they were actually giving me so much more than just communication. They were giving me a sense of value for the atmosphere and situation I was in. Then fast forwarding to when I was 20, so about 7 years old, I was introduced to smart hearing aids. And all that is, besides the fact the hearing aids have gotten even better, so for instance, the first thing I noticed was the all-around surround system, so the ability to localise where sounds were coming from. So I just heard someone walk into the room over here, and I wouldn't have been able to do that before. Before, the sounds would be magnified, I would hear it, but I would be searching around the room trying to find where that sound came from. So if you imagine you're in a group of people at a pub and you're socialising and lots of people talking at the same time, again, I would feel very excluded because I'd be hearing sounds and voices but not knowing where they're coming from or who's talking at what time. So that can be quite overwhelming. So that's why stereotypically deaf people are very one-on-one people. They don't like to be in crowds of people. But these hearing aids have enabled me to be a part of those big groups because I can localize where sounds are coming from. So the quality of the hearing aids have gotten so much better. The other thing is there's a Bluetooth connectivity to an app on my phone where I can adjust the bass, the treble, the volume, background noise. I can apply it to location. So if I walk into my favorite coffee shop every day and I've made some changes, then next time I walk into that coffee shop, it automatically changes. And what that does is it enables me to make my own order, hear the barista behind the coffee bar, all these things that I wouldn't have been able to do beforehand. Also, it's worth noting that at the age of 20, it was the first time I took my first phone call. Before that, it was all text, or I'd have phone on loudspeaker, which is not great for everybody else. You know what it's like when you're on the train and someone's shouting at the phone. It's not very pleasant. But I can now have that direct streaming mechanism to my hearing aid and actually speak on the phone, which helps, you know, for work and all sorts. I can stream music and I can adjust the bass, the treble with music as well. So what I found when I got these hearing aids was that I could actually hear lyrics in songs. Before then, I would make up my own lyrics. And to be honest, I think my lyrics were always better, but, you know, that's debatable. But now there's that clarity of sound through these hearing aids. I'm not commissioned by these guys, by the way, but it's a GN ReSound hearing aid company. They are amazing. They make some really, really good hearing aid products. And, you know, I sort of owe them my life, really, because I would not be standing here today if it wasn't for these hearing aids. Cool. And then we move on to the Apple Watch. So the Apple Watch, I know a lot of people weren't keen on the idea of the Apple Watch when they were first announced, because it was kind of, oh, this is a con, this is Apple trying to get everyone to buy an iPhone, etc. I must admit, I was working part-time at Apple just as a specialist in the shop, on the shop floor, and they gave out a really good discount for the first time for all the employees to get an Apple Watch, and it was probably bribery. But I honestly got it with the intention of returning it within 14 days. I just wanted to know what this piece of tech would do for someone like me, because I was aware that with my GN ReSound hearing aids, I could Bluetooth connect to my watch. So I wanted to know how that connection would work for me, wanting to be independent and so on. And I was pleasantly surprised. So I wrote this blog, it went viral, it crashed my website, didn't know what to do. But Philip Schiller over in Cupertino, I think he's like the marketing director or something, he retweeted the blog. And then that's when everything crashed and I didn't know what to do. But I think the main thing here, because I'll let you guys go ahead and read the blog, it's pros and cons. It's not, you know, it's really good and it's really bad. It's kind of an equal balance. But the big one here is navigation. So for a blind person, you can have a cane or a guide dog or a guide or a short symbol cane. There's lots of different mobility aids out there, but none of them are going to tell you where to go. Like, as much as people don't understand a lot of the time, you know, my guide dog does not have a sat nav implemented into her brain. I mean, that would be handy, but she doesn't. So I would, like the next person, go into Maps and look at where the local, let's say Starbucks. I go to Starbucks sometimes. And I would put it into my Maps. And then on the watch, it would vibrate. And it would tell me whether to go left or right. And these instructions are streamed to my hearing aids. So if you imagine I've got my guide dog, she is my safety, she is my mobility, but she's waiting on my instruction to say, right, we're going left or we're going right, or find the crossing. And that is what the Maps from the Apple Watch is telling me to do. So it's that whole accessibility toolkit together which has enabled me to be that bit more independent. The Mollywatch Trust, we actually fundraise for Apple Watches for people with Usher Syndrome because we recognise the amazing benefit to actually encouraging deafblind people to be more independent, to actually leave their house. Interestingly, to apply for a guide dog, you have to have routes that you actually go out to. And a lot of blind people, deafblind people, don't go out. They stay at home isolated because they don't feel like they can. But the Apple Watch gave them that step to being able to leave the house, because they're like, right, I know where I'm going, I don't need to rely on someone. And then that's when they could then apply for a guide dog, which is kind of the next stage, if you like. So it really helped that journey, like push along that person, give them that confidence to leave and be independent the way I am today, which is really, really cool. So that's just a little plug there, the Molly Watt Trust fundraise for those. So if you've got any cash kicking about, you know. But yeah, really, really great tool for people with disabilities, but particularly with Usher Syndrome. So here are some of the built-in accessibility. And one of the things I like to talk about with these, obviously it comes with no extra cost. Like lots of people assume that if you are using assistive technology, you're using super expensive software like JAWS or switches or whatever that costs a lot of money and ironically are not very accessible for people with disabilities. Unless their workplace are funding it, they won't necessarily get it because unfortunately there's a very high number of blind people that are unemployed. So, you know, the actual access to these products in the first place is ironically not very accessible. But in our handheld devices, so these are Apple screenshots because I am Apple, but Android do just as good a job. When I do my testing, I test on all the products. But here are some of the features that are found in every single phone that we have out here today. So features such as screen reader, so there are screen readers out there, so it's more navigational, so everything on your screen is read out to you in a way that the person can navigate a screen and do certain user journeys independently all through the years. The thing with VoiceOver as well is you can change the interface, you know, whether you're navigating by headings or landmarks, as Hidi mentioned a moment ago. It's really, really handy when you're surfing the web and you want to navigate through websites differently. VoiceOver is a really, really cool tool like that. You've also got color filters and zoom and magnification. These are the tools that I'm more likely to use in a VoiceOver, which people often get shocked by. A lot of people assume that if you are blind, you use a screen reader, or if you are blind, you use Braille. Totally not the case. It's about 93% of blind people that actually see something. And so a lot of these people would actually utilize this vision that they do have by using tools such as. So with color filters, you can apply like a tint to the screen, so it reduces that glare and sharpens the text for you. So you can change the color depending on preference. I have mine kind of on like an orangey pinky hue. It just looks cool as well. And you can also enable the light and dark mode, which has become a bit of a trend as well, because Twitter brought out a dark mode and Instagram brought out a dark mode, and people use it because they might find it a bit more relaxing on the eye, but it's also a built-in accessibility feature that actually helps lots of low vision, dyslexic people as well. But let's talk facts. So there's 1 billion people living with some form of disability worldwide. Now, I was arguing yesterday at Beyond Telerin that actually this figure could be so much bigger. So in the eyes of tech and accessibility, we are not just thinking about people with disabilities. There are people with impairments, conditions, illnesses that could really benefit from inclusive design. And there's also people that have not been diagnosed with a disability or an impairment. They can wait years for a diagnosis. In the UK, it can be really, really quite tough actually just trying to get that diagnosis. And then there's people that don't identify as a disabled person, so they wouldn't put it on their documents or whatever. So yes, 1 billion people is already a lot of people and should be recognised, but actually this number arguably is much bigger. So the big question is, how do we start thinking and carrying out accessibility for all? So Hidi did a really good slide deck today, and the semantics one, really guiding people in a technical sense and what to do, what not to do, HTML, etc. And the WCAG guidelines. I never know whether people say WCAG or WCAG or whatever, but it's that. These are a group of guidelines that are online, accessible to everyone, that it is a bit like a checklist. You can go through and basically analyse your site in next to the guidelines and see what you are doing that is wrong or not. There's also a lot of Chrome extensions you can get now that can run like a automated audit, if you like. And that that can get you to a point where you're recognizing certain issues. A lot of websites, they would aim for the AA standard rather than the AAA standard. I mean, sometimes the line is just a little bit too far for companies, mainly for budget reasons. So for instance, if you've got media, so like a video on your website, and you have captions, that can be seen as accessible. But if you want AAA standards, you have a BSL interpreter, you know, and they're really expensive. BSL, British Sign Language, or ASL, American Sign Language. So some kind of sign language. That would bump you up to AAA. But in general, with the clients that I work with, we aim for the AA standard. So most people with assistive tech can access a majority of your website. But of course, should never try and stop aiming beyond that. There's no reason why not. But the thing with WCAG, I said yesterday also, is that I don't really like the checklist idea because I don't see it as very realistic in accordance to the actual user. I think designers, developers can forget about who they're actually designing for. So I think it's important that we understand that whilst these resources are there and brilliant, that it's not the be-all, end-all, and we can't just stop there. There's a lot of manual testing that needs to be done to fully ensure that your experience is fully accessible. So actually, when it's all said and done, I would say first and foremost, when I'm doing these things, I do find myself talking about my story a lot, which gets very boring for me. But it's that breaking down the barriers and raising awareness of exactly what accessibility is and the impact and actually who the users are that you're designing for. Because unfortunately, there's still people that stereotype or they have misconceptions around what disability is in certain categories of the blind, the deaf, cognitively impaired, physical, etc. And when you're designing or you're developing tools with these poor perceptions, you then create a bad, inaccessible end user experience, which a lot of the time I know is not intentional, but that is the big grey areas that are being missed out by just focusing on the checklist and not understanding properly what it should really mean to be designing fully accessible, inclusive products. So, for example, just talking about the grey areas, I am registered blind. I do not use Braille. I do not use a screen reader. And I do have some useful vision. So a lot of people do think that if you're blind, you see nothing at all. A lot of blind people do have some useful vision. As I mentioned a moment ago, 93% of blind people see something. It might not be particularly useful. They might see light and shapes and things like that. But actually, when navigating the web, that's really useful. If you've got really good contrast, you can make out drop-down boxes better, buttons, etc. So it's very, very key to understand it's not black and white. Another example, I'm severely deaf. I don't use sign language. I don't require an interpreter, and I am not stupid. Unfortunately, I had to educate my granddad, who was 82, but up until about 5 years ago, he referred to deaf people as deaf and dumb, which is a very old-fashioned saying. And that just stems from where people stereotypically think if you can't speak properly, you are dumb. That's absolutely not true. But this is still something I have to bang on about to this day. And that's why I feel so passionately about raising awareness to educate. One of the other things I think around disabilities, impairments, etc., that people maybe don't consider is the difference in experience depending on whether that person was born with a disability or whether they acquired it. So I experienced both things because I was born deaf and then I acquired the blindness. So for instance, I have 5 degrees youthful vision now. If you were to put me next to someone who was born blind with 5 degrees youthful vision, guaranteed the way we use the web or our phones is very, very different. That person would probably be way better at navigating the site using VoiceOver because they've probably done it their whole entire life. Whereas for me, because I've acquired it, I've had to adapt and change and use different tools as I've gone along. The deafness side, I don't know any different. All I know is that the technology is getting better. And interestingly, as the technology is getting better, my speech has gotten better. There's actually some YouTube videos, some really cringy, awful YouTube videos of me with really bad glasses and hair, terrible, just ignore that. But if you listen to my speech, I actually sound different. And that is because I had older hearing aids, so I didn't have as much access to sounds as I do today. So interestingly, I never imagined that happening. I didn't imagine my own speech improving. I was always told that as a deaf person, I communicated very well, but the tech has gotten better, and so my speech has. But these are just things to consider. Again, you know, the acquiring a disability and being born with a disability, the experiences really, really vary. I show this this picture a lot, really just to try and illustrate how I see. So one of the, like, you can get these simulations, you know, like the goggles with like tunnel vision, or you can get the simulation tools on Chrome that kind of symbolize what it looks like to be partially sighted or tunnel vision or whatever. And I find them really, really unrealistic. They are good in a sense that it gives you an idea of some of the challenges, like, for instance, you know, with modals and things jumping up, or chat boxes jumping up, you can see that if you've got tunnel vision, you're going to miss all that. And so if you're using one of these tools on the internet, it's quite good for your knowledge, but it's important to recognize that's not to the point of exactly how it is for someone with a condition like so. So what I try to illustrate here are the flashing lights. That's a big thing. So if you've got like animated stuff, or flashing stuff, or like, what do you call it? Those moving swipey things. What are they called? What are they called? Yes. Yes, yes, one of those. So they can be, so sometimes you can pause them and you can stop them and you can manually move them along, or, you know, but sometimes they move really fast and it's, yeah. So my flashing lights would then trigger and they'd be doing all this because my eyes are trying to adjust to a new screen, and then it's moving again, and then my, you know, so that's what I'm trying to illustrate here. And it's all, it's just like a template on top of an image of my guide dog Bella running through a field. So I do have, the vision I do have is actually really good. So I can read small text, but I'd just be scanning around a lot. So that's one of the things I just wanted to capture there. So there are still many misconceptions around deafness and blindness. I know that from personal experience, but same with many other disabilities. I can guarantee every other disability, there are still misconceptions and sayings and things that bounce around today, and people don't understand how offensive it is or how unrealistic it is. So it's really important that we all check ourselves and actually understand exactly, you know, that the grey areas out there. I mean, it's impossible, don't get me wrong, it's impossible to understand every disability out there. I think it's more around just changing your perspective and being open-minded to the idea that everybody is different. So of course, when it comes to trying to design something accessible, it doesn't make our job very easy. But if you go in with that mindset, it should be easier to understand. So there are misconceptions around accessible design, so who we are designing for, and the extensive grey areas, which this is where I really start talking about inclusive design. So rather than just sticking to the accessibility buzzword that kind of bounces around Twitter a lot, I try and focus on inclusion, so people actually recognise just the amount of people we're actually trying to include on the user experience. So accessibility is not about targeting minority groups. So I think I've pretty much captured that, but it's more around designing for inclusion. So not only do we involve people in the minorities, but everybody else that might just experience challenges at times. Here's a food for thought. Who here has blue eyes? Obviously talking to the people in the actual room. Yes? Who, do you know anyone with blue eyes? Keep your hands up. Sister, brother, friend, everyone's hand should be upright. 20% of the population have blue eyes. That is the same as disability. So in the UK, there's 20% of people with disabilities. So say, hypothetically, I said, I'm going to make a website, it's going to be really, really cool, but everyone with blue eyes, you can't use it. Right? So actually, let's understand that we all know someone, or we've been in the same room with someone that actually would really benefit from you thinking this way. So who here has used pinch zoom? Yes. Yes. I was going to say, don't fib, don't lie to me. Everyone's used pinch zoom. So let's break it down a bit. So some of the types of impairments. So It's divided. If you're in accessibility, I imagine you've seen these kind of like categories. So you have the visual, the auditory, sensory motor, speech, and cognitive. And I've basically just broken down what these things basically mean. A lot of it, I apologise, one of those looks really inaccessible. The auditory, I don't know what's that saying, but the ability to perceive things visually is the visual, the ability to perceive things audibly, and so on. So these are kind of the categories. So when thinking about types of impairments, here are some of the lists of kind of impairments out there. So it's actually a lot easier for me to read on the bigger screen. So you have blindness, low vision, colour blindness, can't say this word, floaters, cataracts, auditory tinnitus. Lots of people have tinnitus, very, very common. Hearing loss due to aging, long-term exposure to loud noise, and then RSI, arthritis, cerebral palsy, speech, stammering, cancer, smoking, and then, of course, cognitive. You've got Down syndrome, Asperger's. So the list goes on. Obviously, I have not listed every single one, but it's just to get people understanding the, some of the impairments out there. But if we kind of, again, it's awful, I'm so sorry. This visual one is really bad contrast, ignore this. So when we think about temporary and situational, we're trying to apply it to ourselves. So in a situation where we've actually recognised we're not accessing stuff as easily as we have before. So for instance, we've turned up to the office, we've forgotten our glasses, how are we going to access our emails, and so on. What do? Do we just squint and get headaches, or do we pinch zoom, or do we make our text size larger? Glare on a device in bright sunlight, that's the absolute worst when you're outside and you're trying to look at your phone and the sun is just, it's just not helping you at all. And then auditory, medication, excess earwax, exposure to sudden loud noises, noisy environments, so in a pub, you're struggling to communicate with people around you. Sensory motor, so temporary injury, or if you're carrying a child. One of my favourite events I attended that Microsoft did is they had the lift doors opening, and instead of having the buttons on the side, they had it on the floor, so you could tap it with your foot. So if your hands were full or you didn't have arms, that was a piece of inclusive design that had been, that's really, really cool. There's Nexa Digital, the company that I work at, they have Swedish offices. They have a little wooden plank thing that you can put your coffee on as you open the door. So often, back in the day when everyone was in the office, you go into the meeting room, you've got your laptop and your coffee mug, and then you can't get through the door. So they've put a little shelf for you to put your coffee mug down, open the door, walk in, pick up your coffee mug. That's something that helps us, but that's something that would also help the next person with an actual impairment. Speech, hoarseness after shouting. I've certainly experienced that going to a festival where my throat hurts for a few days after that, can't quite speak after. And cognitive, my favourite one, hangover. How annoying is it? Everything's so cognitively overbearing on a hangover when you're trying to do your emails or you're trying to fill in a form. It's just a lot more challenging than what it would be normally. So these are some of the things you might be able to relate to, you might not, or someone has experienced. So this guy is actually experiencing a lot of things. I don't know if anyone can spot them. Headphones, yes, so he's wearing headphones, so he's deafening himself to his surroundings. He's also running, so he's in motion, so his accuracy when he's tapping an app or a text message or whatever. It's also very bright, so seeing the ability to see on the screen. And he's also multitasking, so cognitively, it's a bit. So, does anyone use the sporting apps? Like, Nike and stuff. A lot of them have that really high contrast mode, so it's like dark background, and when you're in glare, you can see your screen better when you're outside, but also when you're in active mode, they make the buttons bigger, so you can easily access them to stop your timer or turn your music on or whatever. So the sporting apps and the apps available on the watch, they've recognized the user's situation and how they could design it to be more inclusive given that situation. So that's kind of situational, but it's inclusive design because it's also benefited those like myself. So the crux I'm trying to get to is anyone can have challenges. I actually nicked this slide off a guy I work with at Nexa, and it says you admit defeat and increase the size, your font size on your phone. This is a card that we found in a card shop in the UK. I talked yesterday about how I have my text size quite large on my phone, but my parents, they're in their 50s, they are sighted, and they have their text size larger than I have mine, and I'm blind. And that's just the way it goes, you know? So start thinking differently. Let's think about the majorities. Let's bring the minorities with us. Ooh. And let's think in a way that is more inclusive. Some German stuff happening in the background here, but we'll continue. So this is why it is so important to never consider accessibility as an afterthought or as help, but as reasonable adjustments. It's one of the mistakes that many companies and organizations do, is that they build a great product or service, and then right at the end, they go, right, what can we do to make things accessible? And actually what they end up doing is spending more money to fix their problem and make it more accessible. So actually that's why it should be implemented right from the very beginning. Users of different impairments, disabilities should be involved, testing your products all the way through, have people like myself, hint, testing your products for accessibility from a real life experience. And it's just so important to consider that, that we're not an afterthought, we just want to have the same equal experience as everybody else. Have you, yeah. Making sure you get your picture. Thank you so much, everyone. As I said, I'm on Twitter. Please do feel free to reach out if you have any questions after today, or whatever. Catch me. Thank you. I don't know how long I took there.
Thank you, Molly.
No problem.
Really great.
Thank
So
you.
I expect a lot of questions.
No pressure.
Anything you want to know from Molly?
That's fine, I'll sit down, it's fine.
Okay.
Sorry? Pardon?
Okay, the camera is following
Oh,
her.
the camera,
so,
right,
yeah,
sorry.
I
Sorry,
think that's okay. So, okay.
I really liked your term inclusive design. Did you heard about the word universal design? It's a concept. I think it's comes from the real estate.
Sorry, I'm going to come closer to you because struggling to hear you. It'll be the accent. Yeah.
I really liked your concept of inclusive design.
Thank
really
you.
like the word. Did you heard about universal design? It's a concept. I think it comes from the real estate, from the architecture.
Oh, okay.
To build things that are usable for all.
Yeah.
Instead of repairs.
Yeah.
Something that does not.
That's
fit for
amazing.
all, yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah. That's very cool. Good to know. Good to know. Thank you.
Any more questions? Mark, did you raise your hand or was it for something else? Okay. I think there's nothing in the chat. So,
Cool.
By the way, I really like that your mom was following on Zoom.
Hi, Mum.
Was really nice. So, thanks a lot. I
Thank
think
you.
then we close this session and we're going to continue at 2:15, I guess it's then, with Karl. And he's going to talk about overlays. So have a short break until then. Thank you. Okay, so we're back again with a third presentation of today's meetup, and that's Karl Groves. I hope you can see him. Not sure where the camera is pointing at right now. And if you are a regular guest of the Accessibility Club, you will definitely have met Karl before, because actually, I remember he's the guy who is actually who made me go to Berlin with the Accessibility Club for the first time.
Oh,
that
yeah.
was like pretty much exactly 5 years ago, and it was a fun story because there was this guy tweeting. I never met him before in person. This guy tweeting, "Oh, I will be in Europe in November. So is there someone who wants to do something with me?" And I was thinking, oh, well, that's interesting. And then Mark was doing his Beyond Tellerrand in Berlin. I think it was the second year or something. So I would be there anyway. And then there was my friend Stefan Judis in Berlin. And I remember him tweeting something about, oh, I would really like to do something accessibility like in Berlin one day. And so it was just putting together all these dots. And I had this little meetup called Accessibility Club, which had only happened in Nuremberg, where I live. It was really small. So I just connected these dots and brought the Accessibility Club to Berlin. And then Karl showed up, and well, he's like Karl, you know. It's always been great to have him, and it's always great topics. And also, I think you've been at pretty much every Accessibility Club ever since.
Good.
Yeah, and all the conferences, the summit in Berlin
Yeah.
2 years ago, and basically he's like a great supporter of the Accessibility Club. So even today, sorry again for the caption troubles we had with the first session, but it should work now, and that's due to Karl and his company Tenon. So thanks a lot, Karl.
Thank you.
And I know you've got a topic today, which is, I mean, it's a very hot topic in the US anyway, and it's also becoming a hot topic in Europe. So it's about overlays, and
Yeah.
you will definitely tell us what overlays are and why they are bad.
Yes,
That's
I
actually
will.
what you go. Oh, sorry for the spoiler. Karl, the stage is yours.
All right. So before I begin, I just want to warn you all that this is going to be a negative talk. Like usually when you go to conferences, especially if you spent the last 2 days at Beyond Tellerrand, you're used to like positivity and inspiration and information. Like his talk, awesomely informational. Like his talk, if you paid attention, there's a lot of good ideas there about how to make the web more accessible. And Molly's talk gave a great overview of like what accessibility is and why it's important. And now I'm going to screw with all that positivity, because if I do my job right at the end of this talk, you're actually going to be pissed off. Yeah. So first, I just want to talk about, we have a problem, right? And the web itself has a problem, and that problem is accessibility. Overall, the accessibility of the web is pretty hideous. In his talk, he talked about the Web Aim 1 million, where he said that the most common problem on the web is color contrast. The second one is text alternatives for images. So these are just really super simple things that are actually missed a lot of the times. And so without equal access to to computers and to the web and all that sort of stuff, that's a huge problem for people with disabilities. It is a civil rights problem. Thankfully, there's a lot of countries out there. Basically, every major economy in the world has a law or a regulation of some kind about accessibility. Now, typically, they started off discussing physical accessibility because some of them happened to the regulations happened to be written before the web really existed. But happily, there's regulations for this, and that's really good news because it gives us a target to strive for. So in the United States, we have the ADA. Actually, in the United States, we have basically 13 laws that have to do with accessibility in one way or another. The Air Carrier Access Act, for instance, talks about airports and airplanes and all that sort of stuff. And the Fair Housing Act is about well, not just about accessibility, but civil rights for people when they're buying housing or doing renting and all that sort of stuff. So we have like a bunch of laws. The EU, in the EU here, you have the EAA, which is the European Accessibility Act. In UK, they have DDA. In Canada, they have ACA. There's BITV here. There's RGAA3. There's the Stanka Act. There's all these different laws, regulations, policies, that sort of thing. In the United States, we tend to enforce our laws like these through litigation. In other words, if your website is inaccessible, the enforcement action really is on the person with disabilities to sue you. Okay, whereas in places like the EU or Canada, a lot of that enforcement action is actually done by the government or some sort of entity that does monitoring and things like that. In Canada, for instance, if you are an employer of more than 50 people, you can be sued, or I'm sorry, you can be fined $100,000 per day for violating accessibility. So that is huge. And this actually makes for an amazing market opportunity for someone, right, who you know, can find a way, maybe, to fix a website's accessibility. So if the government websites have to comply, the private companies have to comply, most people aren't complying, and the penalties are really painful, then if you have the opportunity to provide a solution to this problem, especially if you can do it quickly, cheaply, with minimal disruption to the user interface of the site, well, that's a pretty kick-ass business model, right? So behold the accessibility overlay. Magic, right? So that's where these guys come from, is this idea that they're going to provide a quick solution for you that can automatically make all of your accessibility woes go away. Unfortunately, they're filthy liars. Yeah. So here's a screenshot from Accessibe. Accessibe is the second most popular overlay company in the world. This slide, the image on this slide shows this progression that ultimately winds up saying that their magical artificial intelligence can make your website compliant in 48 hours. Another thing that makes some of these overlay companies hard to track is that they also white label their products. So white labeling, by the way, is the practice of sort of letting someone else sell your software branded for their company. So this is a company called AccessUS.ai. They are a reseller for Accessibe, and of course they're repeating that whole mantra, compliance in less than 48 hours. By the way, there are resellers of Accessibe here in Europe already. Accessiway is out of Italy, but the European markets already have some overlays as well. Facil IT is in France, for instance, and they repeat the same bullshit. Another weird trait of overlay vendors, in terms of this whole idea of them basically being filthy liars, is how much they lie about what customers they have. So this is a screenshot from Alliable, A11YABLE, and it contains a list of purported customers. There's like 15, 16 on there. And actually, during some investigation on these claims, what I noticed was that only 5 of these people have any relationship with Alliable. Out of the 15, 16 here, only 5 of them have any sort of relationship with them. One of them is actually an actual customer. And then there's 3 of them that are here that are a reseller, and one of them has the code on their site, but it has commented it out because they don't use it anymore. Another really fun one is Microsoft. And I said this yesterday, I'll say it again because I am a Mac fanboy. I have my iPad Pro in there, my iPhone, my MacBook here. There's altogether about 18 devices in my home that are Apple devices. And I'm going to say right now, Microsoft kicks the shit out of everyone when it comes to accessibility. Microsoft is amazing. A lot of the stuff that they do, especially starting with like Windows 10 and forward, they've made massive strides in making their own platform accessible, increasing the utility of the Ease of Access Center, making sure that their own products like Office and things like that are really accessible. Teams, I gotta say they got a lot of improvements to make there. But what I'm gonna say is Microsoft absolutely, very definitely is not a customer of Alliable. In fact, I spoke to a C-level executive directly at Microsoft to ask, and they said no. And the other thing is, kind of pisses me off, is that I am a Microsoft vendor, and my agreement with Microsoft says that I can't put their logo on my site. But this guy can just lie. Anyway. Another lie they try to tell is that they're wildly more successful than they really are. So this is a company called Equal Web. They say that it's currently installed on over 100 million web pages. Now, all of us in the room, I think, are probably developers or at least highly skilled on the web. We know that that web page idea is kind of squishy. Do they mean pages? Do they mean distinct URLs? They definitely don't mean sites. What I found, though, in my research is that they are installed on 6,000 websites throughout the world. So basically all 6,000 of those websites average 16,757 pages on each website, right? No. Even if we counted e-commerce websites, they typically are not going to reach 16,000 pages. Another one this is from a company called Online ADA. They make a product called Max Access. And on this post I believe it was a Facebook post, it says, why certification is the only accessibility solution you'll ever need. Unfortunately, there is no actual independently developed, industry-wide, industry-recognized certification of every kind. So whatever they're giving you is basically not worth the paper it is printed on. Another one, and thank God these guys are lying because they put me out of a job, $16 a month to have 100% AA compliance. That's just not even realistic. They're just like, just give us your money. And this is another favorite one of mine, True Abilities. One of these, either Purple Lens or True Abilities, I think they are in France or something like that. Anyway, this one, they say all you have to do is install their little Java, just copy the little JavaScript snippet, it's okay. It's gonna be good. And they all of them say, one line of code and it's not gonna harm your performance. Well, all of us know that that one line of code is actually bringing in a big ass library. It's not just one line of code, don't worry about it. Another one I really like about this is that when you look at the designs on these websites, you'll often see people like using either photo library art or something like that of a disabled person in like this hospital wheelchair, like this drawing here, the hospital wheelchair. Nobody who's actually in a wheelchair is going to use a hospital wheelchair. I spent 2 years in a wheelchair when I was a kid in elementary school. Those wheelchairs suck ass. Nobody's actually going to have one. Or the other thing you see is like all the blind people in their clip art are wearing sunglasses like Stevie Wonder. The truth is most blind people don't wear sunglasses like that. And then the other thing you'll see is like they'll have the cane propped up against the desk. And actually most blind people's canes, as a matter of fact, Molly's cane when she was here, folds up. So you can put it in your backpack or put it away, get it out of the way. You're not going to sit there and bang into this stupid thing while you're at your desk. But they don't understand that. They just like, let's get a guy, some glasses on him, give him a cane, he's done. We're inclusive. Another one, and this is a big one, especially here in the for those of us in the United States, is this idea that by installing the overlay, you are going to be protected, like a shield from being sued. And that's actually bullshit too. Here's a LinkedIn post from the CEO of Accessibility. He says, and I'm going to highlight just one part, you have never, not once had encountered a company that got sued because of Accessibility. You have only seen companies that have joined Accessibility to be a solution to their already existing legal situation. Nope. Because right around that time he posted that on LinkedIn, I had been hired by a law firm to be the expert witness on a lawsuit called Murphy versus iBobs. This is what a legal filing in the United States courts looks like. It's very, Times New Roman, and it's got a specific format. But the thing that he said here is you've only seen them join Accessibility to be a solution. No, actually, Accessibility was already installed on the iBobs website. And we did an investigation of all the websites that use Accessibility, including the plaintiff site and some other representative sites. And what we found is that Accessibility is unable to correct accessibility issues in images and non-text content, unable to fix accessibility issues in forms, unable to fix accessibility issues in document structure, unable to correct accessibility issues in keyboard navigation, and using Accessibility itself, just having it on your site, introduces new accessibility problems. So this is another lie they tell that's on the Accessibility website. They say they provide litigation support. Well, I'm telling you here that in my entire involvement in this particular court case, nobody from Accessibility was seen at all. They were not involved as in any way that I can imagine. In fact, across 195 lawsuits in the United States for websites that had a widget on their site at the time, 195 lawsuits, 95 of those were Accessibility customers. Well, now you're thinking, Karl, you really did fulfill your promise on the negativity. But can you really say that they're not useful? Look at the helpful tools that they offer. So these are some of the background images here are the widgets there, they call them the widgets, that provide these accessibility enhancements. So for instance, this one here is from I think they're both from Make Sense, MK Sense, Make Sense, whatever they call themselves. And look, they have the ability to increase the font size. And underneath the word helpful, there's a label there that says enhancements for visually impaired, adjustments for color blindness, hide animations and flashes, typical view, whatever the hell a typical view is, accessibility statement. I like that you have to pay for an accessibility statement. The W3C actually has a statement generator. Big white cursor, big black cursor, screen reader navigation, blah, blah, blah. By the way, the font size increase here, that thing, you click that 4 times and that's as high as it'll go. So, yay. Here's Accessibility. Again, they have content adjustments. There's the big font adjustment here. You can go up or higher or lower. There's the readable font, the text magnifier, emphasize links, emphasize titles. The font adjustment actually only goes up to 200%, which means, yes, you can ostensibly support WCAG level AA, but not AAA, because it won't let you go to 400%. Here's another one. This has got the screen reader adjustments, keyboard navigation, hiding images, muting sounds, useful links. So many useful things. It's like assistive technology right on your website. There's just one problem. If you need these features, like larger fonts, or text magnification, or high contrast, or something like that, don't you need that on every website? Like if you need a high contrast mode in order for this content to be accessible, wouldn't you need it on every single site you visit? And not just the web, you would need it on all of your applications, like your email client or your Office product or whatever. And so that's why all this stuff exists on your computer. So this picture back here is from Microsoft's Ease of Access Center. So all that stuff that these guys were saying that you already have on your computer. You can for those of you in Windows, you can go to Ease of Access settings. You can see this stuff that I'm showing you. If you're on a Mac, you just go to System Preferences and then go to Accessibility, and all the stuff is there. So this stuff about the size here, by the way, like I mentioned here, EqualWeb EqualWeb goes up to 400%, I think, but Accessibility goes up to only 2%. You drag this slider here on Windows to the big A, that is way freaking bigger than the 400% that they offer. And of course, why not? Because you might need it. There's display settings, cursor and pointer settings, magnifier settings, color filters, high contrast mode, narrator, built-in screen reader, caption display, and you can change the way that the captions look. There's contrast adjustment. It's all here for you. All of that same functionality, literally everything is built into your computer. You have a magnifier in here in Windows Ease of Access settings in which you can change the zoom level. The zoom level goes way higher than anything any accessibility overlay company can possibly give you. And those crazy kids at Apple do the same thing. Like I just mentioned, you can change, here you can change your pointer click speed, the type of delay between double clicks. Again, captions, dictation, real-time text, the audio stuff, mouse and trackpad, all that sort of stuff, including switch control and all sorts of cool things. But wait, Karl, they also offer things specific for screen readers, like this screen reader navigation mode. And screen reader navigations will let you go to links, and they'll give you a list of the links and a list of the headings and a list of the lists and a list of the images and all that sort of stuff. That's cool, right? Shit. We already have that stuff too. So here's, I believe this is JAWS. JAWS is a screen reader. Yes, as Molly mentioned, it's pretty expensive, but you also do still have these features available in Narrator on your Windows machine and, oh my God, on Mac OS too. So VoiceOver on the Mac does this. NVDA is the other picture we see on the screen, and that is a free screen reader for Windows. But Karl, MK Sense has high contrast mode. Yes, they have one high contrast mode. There is a granular way to control your contrast in Mac OS, and Windows offers about 7, I think, high contrast modes. So MK Sense, 1 high contrast mode. Windows Ease of Access, about 7, and you can customize the shit out of them. But Karl, big ass cursor. Big ass shit. Yeah, you can have a big ass cursor on Windows. You can have a big ass cursor on Mac OS. Yeah, everything that those tools do, they either do badly or are not at all a better alternative to what already exists in the user's computer by default. So I want to explain a bit why this matters, because it's not just that these guys lie. Okay, yes, the lying is really, really bad. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, the lying is worse than the fact that the products don't really do a whole lot. The fact is that lots of products out there suck, right? I mean, we've all bought something at some time in our lives that just was a crappy product. So the fact that they don't have, they don't go up really high in the font sizes or anything, that doesn't matter as much as this. The picture on this slide is from the Capitol Crawl. And this event happened on March 13th, 1990. The Capitol Crawl was a protest event by disability rights advocates in the United States. At the time, there had been a legislation introduced into Congress about that is basically the ADA, and this protest was meant to encourage our president to sign it. So George H.W. Bush, he's George Bush Sr., eventually did sign the law on July 26, 1990. And I want to highlight the timing of that. July 26, 1990, in the United States, we already had the Civil Rights Act, which prevented discrimination on the basis of color in 1964. It took 26 years for people with disabilities to get their civil rights in the United States. Civil rights for people with disabilities always lags behind everyone else's civil rights across the entire planet. And the problem with overlays, or the problem with their false claims, is that if let's say you're a small business, maybe a small web store, restaurant, or something like that, and you are now either faced with a lawsuit or you're scared of getting a lawsuit, and this vendor comes by and says, we will give you 100% compliance in 48 hours. And you don't know any better, right? They're going to buy it. These things cost, what we saw, Purple Lens cost $16 a month, which is just ridiculous. But the others don't cost much more than a couple $100 a month at the most. And you're going to be like, well, hell yeah, I'm going to buy that. That's going to be my insurance. These guys offer litigation support. It's 100% accessible. Why not? And this perpetuates disability discrimination, because when you believe that you've gotten 100% coverage from this vendor, you're going to stop. And you're going to stop doing anything else for improving the accessibility of your stuff. And that perpetuates discrimination against people with disabilities. So what I'd like you to do is, if you care about disability, equity, and inclusion, that obviously means you also believe in accessibility. And so as a result, you must choose to avoid overlays. You must recommend to your customers and to your friends that they do not even consider them. And if you would like to read more about this, you can go to overlayfactsheet.com. Hida had put it up as well. And that has the signatures of over 600 accessibility experts, disability rights advocates, and end users with disabilities in 16 different countries, and includes a breakdown of the facts as I laid them out here, as well as some other more nuanced, less ranty kind of things. Read that, share that link to anyone and everyone you want, and sign it yourself if you are so inclined. Thank you. By the way, I also have large and extra large shirts that say your overlay does not work. And so if you want one, take multiple, because I don't want to take those back with me on the plane. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Karl. I mean, obviously the shirts are mostly interesting for the people in the room here, which are not that many, but if there are any shirts left, I'm happy to take them with me and distribute them.
Okay.
At the next event, or maybe
Sure, yeah.
raffle some of them or something.
Yeah.
So, but first of all, I would really like to hear your questions about overlays, and I'm sure there will be questions, right? Okay, that's great. Give me a second. Yeah, okay. Wait, Shep, come around. Take the mic.
Thank you for your talk. My question would be, do you think there are areas that would be so, because the mission of these vendors per se is a good one. So, and then comes in the marketing department and reality and and so on. But I could imagine areas where you could potentially fix stuff or retrofit stuff that would work.
Yeah.
What is your opinion? So is this like a total dead end, or is there would that be possible?
Yeah, so Hida highlighted some of this stuff in his talk, but I'll mention that I've done my own sort of experimenting with this because I own a company that has an accessibility testing tool, and we have about 189 accessibility tests in production. So what I did one time was I said, okay, maybe these guys know something I don't know. Maybe there's something they've figured out. And so I started out with the idea that obviously in order to fix something, I have to detect it, right? So in order to find something, you have to detect that it is a problem and then, of course, apply the necessary repair. So already we're at a bit of a disadvantage because automatic testing can get you maybe of the overall possible issues that you need to look for, about 25 to 30% of the issues. So we're already at sort of a disadvantage there from an automation perspective. But then I went through and we did find, I want to say about 73 of our accessibility tests we could apply either a generic or a configurable repair to. So that's pretty good, 73 individual things. Our tests are really atomic. So that's another thing to think of. I take a unit testing approach to the way we write our tests. So it's really, really atomic, which is also great for fixing because if you can therefore find the appropriate fit. So basically what I found was at least out of our stuff, we can fix 46% by volume of the automatically discoverable issues. So what is that number in the real world? Maybe 18%. So it's not trivial, right? There's a lot that can be fixed. And then there's this idea of applying artificial intelligence to it. The AI that they claim that they're using to fix things is really only image recognition. And image recognition is particularly poor. Like, you don't know whether you have peanut butter or tahini. AI can't tell you that, right? So there's that problem, is just the general accuracy. And then there's this other added layer, which is intent and figuring out what the author's intent was. So I do believe that artificial intelligence will eventually get us to a point where we may be able to provide more predictability to common errors, because there is a common theme of issues on the web. And I'll backtrack just a little bit on that matter. which is there's this global best practice idea that I just said we can only test about 25% of, but the truth is, the truth is that Tenon can find 80% of the most likely issues, you know, because some of those things are super esoteric or things like that. But we compared the data from our audits to the data from that Tenon can find automatically, and we did find that we can do 80%. But that's still not enough. You know, it's still not the same as saying 100% compliant in 48 hours, which is not a thing. I do hope that there are going to be ways for that sort of thing to happen, and I'd like to see some of these features make their way into browsers, the way that Hidde was talking about this morning. My daughter, for instance, is dyslexic, and so she uses a couple of Chrome extensions to help either improve the readability of the text on the screen or read the text out loud for her. And so that's the kind of thing that really does belong in the browser, right? It's a cool feature, put it in the browser, and expose that to the user, because a per-site solution isn't all that great. So I think there's a lot of good to be had from some of this sort of stuff. It's just not at a per-site solution basis, I think, and it's also just oversold in terms of its capabilities. We're a long way away from being able to fully, you know, make things right. Anything else? Any other questions?
Any questions here in the room? We've got 2 questions in the chat, which are not exactly accessibility related, but
why is he so handsome? I don't.
Yeah, kind
I was
of.
born this way. I don't know. Yeah, what are they?
Yeah, no, because they told us that these have to be the last questions, and the accessibility questions are higher priority. So please go ahead.
So my next question would be, I think you said that these overlays might even harm accessibility, or they probably very much do harm accessibility for people in need. Is there any plan to maybe you talk to ad blocker vendors or stuff? Or are there extensions that you can install to get rid of this, to block away all these
There are.
Yeah,
yep.
Cool.
So the one that I know of that's most frequently used it's called excessive BYE, BYE, and yeah. So if you read the overlay fact sheet, there's a section called "In Their Own Words," and it talks about the widgets and the way that they actually can tend to interfere with people's ability to use stuff. In other words, it assumes, for instance, if you start tabbing on a site, that it's going to assume that you're a screen reader user or a keyboard only user, and sort of strip away your ability to do this on your own. And there's lots of people talking about frustrations that they've had with it. So there is an extension called excessive BYE that blocks stuff. And just in full disclosure, it's not accessibility that is the only one that does those sorts of things. So the excessive BYE actually blocks, I think it blocks user way and audio eye as well. Yeah. All right, what do you got?
Okay, Shep. Another third question, maybe? Okay. Any more questions in the room here? Okay, so there is one statement I will put first. Beatrice, I know her from Germany. She would like to thank you for the support you provide to alley experts and people with disabilities that have been sued by overlay companies. So thanks a lot for that, because we know that you're really active in this field. And
yeah, and I do. And as a matter of fact, for those who aren't aware of what's going on in this area right now, in France, that company Facile IT has sued at least one person that I know of. They've also sent out nastygrams to people's employers, and they sent some sort of complaint to Armony's company, which is completely leaving my brain right, Coena. And so that's aggressive. What we call that in the United States is called SLAP, which is strategic lawsuit to something, anyway, to silence a critic. In the United States, our laws are a bit looser, which is surprising when it comes to that sort of thing, where you basically all you have to do is prove that what you've told is the truth, right? So the ultimate defense against defamation is telling the truth. Apparently, this company, Facile IT, and others, by the way, in France have gotten away with silencing critics by suing them. So I'm following closely on what's happening with Julie. Julie, who's the person who's been individually sued, and if she needs money, I'm just going to give her some money to defend this thing, because it's bullshit. You can't, obviously, if you're going to defame somebody and you're going to really say something bad, you should be sued if it's not true. If it's true, then suck it up and fix what the critics are calling you out for.
Yeah, Tom was asking, why is it that the overlays are more prominent in the US compared to the EU, or are they? What's your stance on that?
Yeah, I think that they are more prominent in the United States because of the litigation atmosphere that we have had for the last several years. But, and this is a big but, I predict that they're going to make their way into Europe much more forcefully now with the EAA's regulations becoming more in force. Now, the EAA, as I understand it, is only governmental stuff, but that's enough, you know what I mean? Because the fines are big enough. But then you also do have some countries that have their own laws that do call for private sector companies to be conformant, and those fines are nasty, and these guys are promising that you can be saved from those fines.
All right. So then the two non-accessibility related questions. There's one I can't personally answer because I don't know this, but my friend Maya asks if you know the llama that says Karl.
No.
Okay.
Send me a link.
It was a funny question, but Maya, I think Karl wants the link. So,
okay, yeah.
That's great. And another question from Tom, and this is the final question. He wants to know, which is your favorite punk song?
Wow, that is a great question. So in the United States, there's a hardcore punk band called Slapshot, and the song that I would say is "Punk's Dead, You're Next" is my favorite one from Slapshot for sure.
Okay, thank you. He says. So that's it. Thank you, Karl. That was great. Awesome talk. We're going to have another break now. You were a bit quicker than I expected, but still, we probably need some minutes to set up. Oh, sorry. There's the camera. Okay, so need to speak to the camera. We're going to have a short break now, but we need a couple of minutes to set up. The last thing we would like to do today is to have a little discussion. I have no idea what we're going to discuss about, but we would like to use the Zoom call for like getting you into the call, and you could ask questions and stuff. So if you're not already on the Zoom call, we would recommend you to go there. You can also follow us on the YouTube live stream if you just want to listen, but you can also come over to the Zoom call. The address is https://zoom.ally.club. I also put that to the YouTube chat. Just get over there. We probably need some minutes. We try to get you into the room here and have a discussion. We're going to start at 3:15, I guess. That's about 20 minutes or something. So have a short break and see you then for the last session. Bye-bye. Test, test. Do you hear me? Okay. So I'm asking into the Zoom call. Do you hear us now? I hope you can hear us. It would be nice if someone of you could also like switch. Yeah. Okay. But why would that be late? Because actually it's like a Zoom call, so they should see us immediately actually. So maybe someone of you could switch on their camera and say something so that we know that we can hear you as well. That would be nice. This is a super experimental setup, as you see. Trying to get you into the room, into the YouTube. It's like science fiction, what we're doing here. Totally. Can you see and hear something of us? Okay, there was someone. Okay, you could like turn up the volume maybe on the speaker, Mark, like on the plus symbol. Okay, so I guess it's working, right? Okay, perfect. So good sound. You can hear us. We can't see you in the stream, only on the one laptop. Maybe Shep, you want to sit there and just observe that and see if. Yeah, that would be nice. On Zoom, you don't see or hear anything. Okay, I'm totally overwhelmed with the situation. Okay. So we're talking to YouTube, but not to Zoom. Okay, so Shep, maybe you can write them. They have to turn on. But is it live on YouTube or is it delayed by like? Okay, that's going to be complicated. We're going to improve that next time. But please feel free to like still write something or talk to the Zoom call. We will hear you, but it's kind of complicated, like streaming and Zooming and everything at once. Sorry for the complications. Well, we've got still like 30 minutes or something left. We would like to use that for maybe doing some discussion. Actually, I don't have a topic for the discussion because we just thought it would be nice to have a discussion, as we always do that. But there's no real topic. So I asked into the round if someone has to say something, someone has a thesis, someone has a question, and obviously Karl has a question. He said it's a tough one, but he didn't spoiler it. So I would like to give the microphone to Karl, and you could like give us your question.
Okay, my question is, so after doing this accessibility stuff for about 20 years, what I can definitely say is that, sorry, is that, you know, a lot of the things that we tell customers now are the things that we've been telling customers for the last 20 years. So here is my question. What can we do now so that we are not telling customers the same things 20 years from now? How can we make it so that we're answering new questions, maybe harder questions, maybe just different questions, but considering what we're seeing now, we want to make it so that we don't have to see or say those same things 20 years from now. What do we do? How do we answer that? Anyone?
That's really a tough question. You told us. Yeah, this is a hard one. So any ideas about that? Give me the microphone.
So my hope is that there are some things that we've been telling customers that we could remove by kind of making them easier to solve. So like make it easier for web developers to do the right thing by giving them the right examples, basically. Like I mentioned before in my talk, I think we can have browsers solve some of the problems like contrast. I think, you know, we've been talking to customers about contrast for 20 years. I think that's a conversation we don't really need to have if tools are able to catch up. And if we are able to do that with a couple of these problems, then maybe the conversation can shift to kind of the harder problems, so the more complex patterns, the things that are not as easy to solve, because many of the things I've mentioned in my talk are trivial. We could fix the trivial things and then move on to the harder things, maybe.
It's possible that the camera just went out. I don't know if that's true. And Mark is out of the room, so we're kind of. It's weird. We're trying to fix that one. There is one thing I would like to contribute to the question. I think a very important thing that I'm seeing happening is that we are about to mainstream the topic. I mean, the fact that we had just had a 2 days conference, kind of a mainstream conference with at least three of like 12 or 15 talks about accessibility topics. Actually, this is a huge progress I see. Actually, so it's kind of moving towards. Yeah, I know. We just seen that, but you were out of the room and we were talking. So we're trying to fix that. I would like to get rid of the microphone before I would like to say this. So this is kind of an important thing. I think accessibility topics are moving towards the regular developers, which is kind of a progress, I think. We didn't have that like 20 years ago, at least 20 years ago. I wasn't working in accessibility, but yeah. Anyone else?
We should aim for the on the basic level where the education for web development starts. So universities, Code Academy, stuff everywhere must be dropped. Like on the first course, think on accessibility, so that in 20 years, there's no reason to repeat everything again and again.
Yeah, just adding to that, I basically had the same idea that there is, well, I hear anyway, there's a trend in web development going through the years that, like 20 years ago, it was something like having like browser-specific development, then came cross-browser, then people started doing SEO stuff, not really knowing what they do, putting keywords into everything, then they figured it out, and after evolution, I hear anyway now that that there is now the time that we have a not accessible web and we are moving towards an accessible web. And I myself am a web developer, and in my education there was no mentioning of accessibility. It was not mentioned at all. Actually, web development was kind of the small stepchild of the computer science students there as well, who all, they wanted to do the cool stuff now, big data, machine learning, and well, web development really is like a self-taught subject a lot of the time, really. So how you would get into the heads of the people actually is there the hard question. How do you get there that the people are actually doing that stuff? That's one thing I want to add, and the other thing, asking maybe harder questions, or one thing that I was thinking about is being more aggressive, being more radical. My boss, I work for an inclusion activist in Germany, Raul Krauthausen from Sozialhelden, and he said, I remember something that he said, that after like years and years of talking about the same topics, always putting on the same phrases, working on inclusion and like being discouraged after a time because nothing changes in a way. Or you can have there's change, of course, but you can have the idea that there may be no change. I was really fed up, and he's like, no, we have to do things differently. We have to like get back on the street, be more active, be activists actually, step on people's feet and stop being nice, basically, That's one thing as well, because otherwise you will not get the attention of the people. Besides making them pay for their mistakes, like, the money is always a good thing.
So I think it helps if we see ourselves also or compare ourselves with teachers, because teachers also are in this situation where they have to teach stuff over and over again. and so at least at my school, I had a few teachers that burned out, probably because of this never-ending thing. And this, because they don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that's a little bit our problem as well. And I think it's a bit of a subjective thing also. And you also have to take into account that the amount of developers and also customers that pour into the web space is like exponentially growing since years. And so I think you just feel like you're like fighting an uphill battle, or it is an uphill battle, but I think we do have an impact. It's just, yeah, it just vanishes below the wave of developers that pour in and also customers. But I think we change things for the better, just not enough for our taste.
Anyone else in the room or maybe on the stream? Hede wants to say something. It's going to be funny to get over with the microphone here. Give me a second.
Yeah, and one tiny thing to add to the education topic. I know at the W3C and the Web Accessibility Initiative, people are working on curricula for web accessibility. And if anyone is watching this and involved in teaching, have a look at that, because they are modules that help you make a course about web accessibility. So focused on how can we teach to developers, how can we teach design subjects, and kind of broken down in different different roles. And they are meant for universities or schools to try and make a course about web accessibility or embed web accessibility in their existing courses.
I know it's complicated to get the remote participants involved if they hear everything like 30 seconds delayed or something. But we're trying to reserve a slot for you now. So please, we're going to be silent. Please just interrupt me and start to talk, please. It's kind of a weird experience, but please take the stage. We don't see you either, by the way. We don't see you, we don't hear you. But hopefully someone is talking. In this direction. Are you sure we have sound mark on the speaker?
There's a question I just put in the chat.
Yeah, maybe just read it and.
So Volker says, not a question, but maybe a cheer up. I'm just getting into web development, and I'm currently in a 3-month boot camp. Accessibility has been a topic quite a few times, not only for SEO, but in general. Given the short time we have, I think there seems to be a lot of change on the matter. Yeah, so there is, I do have to admit that my discussion of this, being something that I've been talking about for 20 years, I do have to admit that in the physical space, the earliest instances of accessibility, in the physical space, were hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But even in the Industrial Revolution, we did see cases of people trying to make things more accessible back then. So I imagine the people who've been working in the accessibility in the physical space who were like laughing at this 20-year idea. But I think that so I think it is good to put that into perspective. Of course, now is not soon enough, right? But still, 20 years is good, and I like the fact that he and I forget your name. I'm sorry, Bjorn. Bjorn was mentioning a similar thing to my experience, which is that I'm a self-taught web developer. As a matter of fact, the web didn't exist till I was in college, so that's kind of dating myself. But anyway. So learning web development, as I progressed through, there wasn't a whole lot of discussion of accessibility, especially for self-taught people. And even then, even later on in my career, I experienced people who had gone to like school for computer science, and even then, accessibility was just a drop in the bucket. But now we do hear, people like Volker saying, I went to a boot camp, or I went to, or I even went to coding academy or something like that, and had a mention of it. And we do see, as Hida was mentioning, actual curriculum being developed on it. There's the Teach Access initiative as well that helps to create that sort of thing. Helps create those curricula that don't exist. So that's really, really awesome, and hoping that we can see that even more. Dave Price mentions, he says, I have some input on getting accessibility out there. If we don't have voice input, should we just ask Dave to put it in the chat? Yeah, Dave, go ahead and put that in your chat, and we'll wait a couple seconds.
So we have two chats, and Beatrice says hire diverse teams so that people get in touch with PWD. What is it? I don't know. Oh yes, sorry. And understand they are people with different personalization needs, and helps too. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Absolutely. I mean, this is something you can really talk about, right? Because this is basically what you're doing at Sozialhelden, right? Yeah, and hiring diverse teams and stuff like that. So did the one put something into the chat? Oh, we hear something. We can.
Hi. We're talking about getting the message out there for accessibility. I think it all depends on really what industry you're in. So, for instance, I'm very fortunate in the company I work for. They do take accessibility. I don't know if anybody can hear me or not. Yes, we hear you. Oh right, okay. Yeah, I'm still here, just crossing over with other people. But did you ask the question already? No, I haven't. It's not a question as such. It was more of a statement. Okay.
Anyone else on any of the channels? Yeah, it's because of this.
What I was basically trying to say was that although I'm very fortunate with the company I work for, is really, really good at accessibility. When you're looking at digital agencies who are on a profit-driven thing where everything's wanted 2 days ago, that accessibility is always the last thing to be considered, and is always the last thing that's going to be thingied on the budget. So.
Yeah.
It's always hard to try and get it past the product and project managers to be put into the actual project. So it's really, really difficult. And although we've been doing it for the last 20 years, it's still going to carry on regardless of how much we try and hammer away at it. It will always be there as an extra. We know that it's not an extra. We know it should be part of it, but it should be. It should be. We need to educate them, but it's all down to the client's budget.
True. Okay, thank you. Probably you need to say this, otherwise it's like there in 1 minute or something. Okay, Gunnar, would you be able to come to the microphone so that...
So I don't work for an agency, but am employed. But as a developer, and I think as developers, we have it in our hands somehow. If the project manager asks, how much time do you need for this feature, and you tell him, let's say, 2 days. And when the project manager asks, how much time would you need if you leave the accessibility out, and you say 1 day, it's your problem, not his. It's you made it the problem. Of course, the project manager will tell you, okay, leave the accessibility out if you save 1 day. You gave them the option in the first place. Don't do that. If he asks how much time would it need when you leave the accessibility out, and say also 2 days, and just do it.
3 days.
Okay.
3 days means you can't leave out the accessibility aspect. So that's a
Right, hello. Yeah, basically what I'm trying to say, what I was trying to say was that I'm very fortunate that I work for a company that deals, with accessibility. As we're a non-profit, and it's an important thing. But over the years, I mean, I think it was Carl that mentioned that for the last 20 years that he's been battling against it. It's the same with me. I've been battling against the whole accessibility thing. But when you've got, I've worked with many digital agencies over the years, and I can't see it ending anytime soon, really, to be honest. When it comes down to budget and what the clients can afford, the first thing always to go is accessibility and things like that, because it's something that's extra. And I know we know that it's important and it can be included in part of it, if it's built properly. But I always think it will always be a battle, especially with project managers, product managers. When it comes down to timings and how quick we can get stuff out, especially when there's profit involved. So I think we just got to keep going at it.
right. Okay. I see so many people and so many computers doing stuff to tie us together. It's a really tough job we're doing right now. Okay, Shep has one more comment.
Yes, so I've Paul van Buren in the chat. In my experience, if you can make your application simpler, you almost always make it more accessible. I personally like to start with text only, all else is extra. And then Ronnie builds on top of that, an MVP should be accessible, otherwise it's not an MVP. And Tom writes, so the prospect of being fined is the only way to hammer into this into the budgets and get it past project managers at all.
That's a question, right? Maybe more of a statement, yeah. Yeah. Okay, but maybe back to Carl's original question. So what can we do now, actually, to when we go home now, today or tomorrow or whenever? What's the thing we are taking with us? What can we do tomorrow in our daily work to prevent us from being at the same point in 20 years from now? So what are you taking home with you? Oliver, just give me a second.
Yes, what I learned and what someone said in the internet, it's stop about fixing things, start teaching. I don't know where it was, who it was, but I think that's the truth, the horrible truth. We have to teach, and said the same things again and again and again, and hopefully that sticks to. I more talk to companies and cultural things, and they never heard about accessibility. Really, that's the all-day truth. I expect they know all these ramps for staircases. They know the accessibility issues in buildings, but they don't know that the web has an accessibility issue. They just don't know it, and that's why I think we have to talk again and again and again, and hope in 20 years.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. If we have some tickets to fix some accessibility issues, and project manager would ask me how much time would you need to fix these issues. I wouldn't tell him 1 hour, but I would tell him 3 hours for me, for this colleague, and for this colleague. And we do it together as a workshop. And so we spread the knowledge around.
So maybe one idea would be to that we can copy from Greenpeace and groups like that is to indeed like go to court, pick a company that we sue, not because that company is like worse than others, but to have like a public discussion and maybe also raise awareness with people running these companies, because, for example, there was this this ruling against the German way of gambling with climate stuff. So they overruled that, and I think they also ruled against Shell. I think because that they harm the environment, and I don't know what exactly they need to do or pay. But maybe we need to have something like that, and maybe multiple times in a row until things start moving. I don't know. That's also some sort of activism, maybe.
So there's a guy in UK who used to work at the BBC, the Broadcasting Corporation, and Gareth Ford Williams did a piece called The Little Book of Accessibility, and it's centering around the topic of, I think, empathy, and that's one of the key things. If you can try and get different people to understand how that affects them and how that might impact their lives, and it's going to be different for every single person, every single team. If you can find a way to get everybody to care about what matters and the culture in the organisation, that is something which can start to change things. And the BBC is a good example of that. Thousands of people work there, and I think they've at least made a start in changing culture for overall accessibility to be a lot better at the centre of everybody's priorities.
Okay. Thanks for all these contributions. I think we should come to an end now, gradually, because we've got a couple of minutes left. And sorry for the confusion with our technical setup. I think we have a lot to, we got a chance to learn a lot today. Things we definitely going to improve in case we do this again as a hybrid event. If there's something for you in the stream you would still want to tell us, I know there's a lot of delay, so until I'm finished with my sentences, please just start talking if you want. Otherwise, I would say we're going to close this now-ish. Anyone else who wants to say something at the room? So if there's something at the chat, please take a chance. Otherwise, I would like to say thank you for this experience, for being with us today, for sticking to us. I know we kind of postponed the event that should have been taken place in April last year. We had to cancel that one. Today was kind of an interesting repetition of that, or even an evolution maybe, because this is kind of a product of what we experienced the last 1.5 years, obviously. We wouldn't have done that as a hybrid event if not many of you would still prefer to stay at home. And I hope you had quite a good experience, at least with the talks. I know the discussion was a bit complicated. Maybe next time we can improve this, but I would actually like to try keeping this and sticking to a hybrid format in the future. I don't know if I could do it without the help of Mark, without the help of Aaron, who's not in the room at the moment. They were really tremendously helpful. Thanks, Karl, again for the captions, even if they were kind of troublesome at the beginning as well. It worked out in the end. So thanks a lot for making this possible. Thanks to obviously Hide, Molly, who already left, and Aaron, Karl, not Aaron. Karl, thanks for being with us. Thanks for spending your time with us. That was a pleasure. I hope we can. I'm sure we'll meet again pretty soon as we can have other events again. I'm not sure what's going to be the next one. There is, like, we planned to have a summit in Amsterdam last year. We had to cancel that one as well, but I know that Vasilis will really be keen on doing this at one point. So maybe this is something we can do in maybe 2022 or later. I don't know. Thanks for being with us. I mean, Mark, would you like to come to the microphone once again, one last time? Looks good. Looks good. So, thank you all for your time. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, Mark, for doing this with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, see you. Yeah. See you soon, maybe in half a year or something. Maybe in May when he's running his next conference. I will definitely be there. So we'll see that. So see you. Bye-bye at the live stream. Bye-bye here in the room. Thanks for being with us.